I spent 35 years teaching history in a public high school in Knoxville, Tennessee. 35 years. And in all that time, in all the courses I taught on world civilizations, on ancient Rome, on the spread of Christianity, I never once mentioned the word Docetism. Not once. I'm not sure I even knew what it was. And here's what bothers me about that now. It's not that the word is obscure. It's that what the word describes was so widespread in the earliest Christian communities that the authors of the New Testament had to write against it directly, in letters that are still in your Bible, right now. I came to this the way I come to most things these days. Sideways, late, with coffee and a book I should have read 40 years ago. If this is your first time here, I want to say something before we go further. My name is Howard. I'm a retired history teacher. I'm not a theologian. I'm not trying to take anything away from you. I started this channel because I found things I couldn't unfind, and I needed somewhere to put them. If that sounds like something you want to stay close to, that button down there is the subscribe button. I'd be glad to have you. The word is Greek, dokein. It means to seem, or to appear, not to be, to seem. And the people who held this belief, who were active in Christian communities as early as the end of the 1st century, possibly earlier, they believed that Jesus Christ did not have a physical human body, that he only seemed to have one, that the birth, the hunger, the thirst, the bleeding, the death, all of it was an appearance, a divine performance on a human stage, but not a real performance, not real blood, not real death. They called this teaching Docetism, from dokein, the theology of seeming. Now stay with me on this, because here's where it gets strange. This is not a fringe idea that you'd have to dig through footnotes to find. This is a belief system that was common enough, active enough, present enough in early Christian communities, that the Apostle John, or whoever wrote the letters attributed to him, felt the need to address it directly in 1 John chapter 4, verses 2 and 3. I want to read you that passage. By this you know the Spirit of God. Every spirit that confesses that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh is from God, and every spirit that does not confess Jesus is not from God. Now, read that again slowly. Every spirit that does not confess that Jesus Christ has come in the flesh. The author of 1 John is not arguing against a hypothetical. He is not setting up a theoretical objection. He is warning his community against real people, people already among them, who were actively teaching that Jesus did not come in the flesh. The warning in the Bible is itself the evidence that the belief existed. I couldn't quite believe what I was reading when that hit me. I had read 1 John probably a dozen times in my life. I had taught it indirectly in the context of early church history, but I had never stopped to think, why did John need to say this? What was happening in those communities that made this specific warning necessary? And that's when I went looking. I want to be honest about what the early days of this research looked like, because it wasn't clean. It wasn't a straight line. I started with Ignatius of Antioch. If you haven't encountered Ignatius before, he was one of the earliest post-apostolic Christian leaders we have any real documentation on. He was the bishop of Antioch in Syria, and around the year 114 AD, let me say that again, 114 AD, he was arrested and transported to Rome, where he was executed. On the road to Rome, he wrote letters. 7 of them survive, and in those letters, addressed to various Christian communities, Smyrna, Tralles, Ephesus, he argues passionately, urgently, almost frantically against something. He writes to the Smyrnaeans, he truly suffered as he truly raised himself, not as certain unbelievers say, that he suffered in appearance only. He writes to the Trallians, stop your ears, therefore, when anyone speaks to you at variance with Jesus Christ, who was truly born and ate and drank, was truly persecuted under Pontius Pilate, was truly crucified and died. Truly, truly, truly. He uses the word over and over. Truly born, truly ate, truly died, and when a writer repeats the word truly that many times about the same subject, it usually means someone nearby is saying, not truly. So, Ignatius in 114 AD is already fighting communities of Christians who believe Jesus only seemed to suffer, who believe the crucifixion was, in some sense, not real, not physically real. But here's where I almost got lost, because when you start pulling on this thread, it branches. There isn't one Docetism, there are several, and some of them are subtle enough that they're easy to miss if you're not paying careful attention. Some Docetists believed Jesus had no body at all, that he was a purely spiritual being, that he passed through Mary like water through a pipe, as one early writer put it. A ghost in human clothing. But then there's a variant, and this is the one that really stopped me cold, where the belief was slightly different. The divine Christ in this version was a separate being from the human Jesus. The divine Christ descended on the man Jesus at his baptism in the Jordan. That's the voice from heaven. This is my beloved Son. But then, before the crucifixion, the divine Christ departed, left, withdrew, so that what hung on the cross was the human shell, abandoned. Alone? And I sat with that for a long time because it changes a verse that I have known since I was a child. My God, why have you forsaken me? That's Jesus on the cross in the Gospel of Mark, chapter 15, verse 34. The cry of dereliction. I grew up hearing that explained as Jesus bearing the weight of human sin, experiencing spiritual separation from the Father. But in this docetic reading, the man crying out is the human shell. The divine Christ has already gone. What you're hearing on that cross is a man calling out to a God who left before the dying started. I'm not sure how to say this exactly, but that detail broke something in me a little. Not my faith in the question. My faith in the easy answer, because I realized I had never actually stopped to wonder why Mark includes that cry at all. It's so raw, so abandoned. It reads like someone alone. And now I was looking at a theological tradition 2,000 years old that said, yes, he was alone, because the divine part left. I almost stopped here. I genuinely did. Not because the research was difficult, but because I wasn't sure I wanted to know what came next. Because if this was a real theological position held by real people in the earliest Christian communities, then the question I'd been avoiding started to push back. Which version came first? The one where Jesus fully suffers as fully human, or the one where he only seems to suffer? Bart Ehrman. And I've cited him before, I'll cite him again, because his work on the New Testament manuscripts is meticulous in a way I deeply respect. Ehrman makes an argument in his book, The Orthodox Corruption of Scripture, published by Oxford University Press in 1993, that the scribes who copied the New Testament actually altered manuscripts specifically to counter Docetism. They changed words, they adjusted verses, they made the humanity of Jesus more explicit in places where earlier manuscripts were more ambiguous. He traces specific textual variants. The baptism account in Luke, for example, there are manuscripts where the voice from heaven says, "You are my beloved Son. Today I have begotten you," which sounds like the divine Christ arriving at baptism rather than Jesus being born divine from conception. The scribes who held Orthodox theology didn't like the implications of that reading, so they changed it, and when I read that, I had to put the book down and go walk around the block. Because if the scribes were changing the text to fight Docetism, that means Docetism was a genuine threat, not a footnote, not a curiosity, a force powerful enough that professional copyists, people whose entire job was to transmit the sacred texts with accuracy, felt the need to intervene, to nudge the text toward the humanity of Jesus in places where the text hadn't been sufficiently clear. Think about what that means for a moment. The scribes copying the New Testament weren't just copying. They were participating in an argument. They were picking a side, and the side they were picking against was widespread enough, and active enough, and theologically coherent enough that they couldn't just ignore it. they had to fight it inside the manuscript tradition itself. Ehrman also traces the Docetic communities back even further, past Ignatius, past the Johannine letters, into the very structure of how certain early communities talked about Christ. The Gospel of John itself has passages that could be read in a Docetic direction if you're not careful. John chapter 1. The Word became flesh and dwelt among us. That statement, the Word becoming flesh, is so emphatic about physicality that some scholars have argued it was written partially in response to exactly the people who were saying the Word didn't become flesh, that it only seemed to. The counter-argument in the text is the evidence of the argument being made outside the text. I kept running into this. Evidence of the belief embedded in the very documents written to fight it. Like finding a letter that says, "Stop spreading the rumor that the king is dead," and realizing the letter itself proves the rumor was spreading. And not just spreading quietly. Spreading publicly enough that someone thought it worth writing down and distributing to an entire community. There's also something important I want to say about Everett Ferguson, who wrote a careful study of early church history that I've spent a lot of time with. Ferguson identifies Ignatius of Antioch as the first writer on record to mount a systematic anti-Docetic polemic. First on record, which means that by 114 AD, when Ignatius is writing, the situation was already developed enough to require a sustained response. Not a passing mention, a sustained response spread across multiple letters to multiple communities, repeating the word truly like a drumbeat. The first time we can date an anti-Docetic argument in Christian writing, 114 AD, it already sounds like a man who has been having this argument for a while, and then I found the text that I haven't been able to stop thinking about since. It's called the Apocalypse of Peter, not the text that sometimes circulates in discussions of early Christian apocrypha generally. This is the Gnostic Apocalypse of Peter, found in the Nag Hammadi Library in Egypt in 1945. A Coptic manuscript, a 4th century copy of a text that most scholars date to the 2nd century, translated from the Greek original by James Brashler and Roger Bullard. In this text, Peter has a vision. He sees the crucifixion, but what he sees is not what the canonical Gospels describe. He sees two figures. One is the human Jesus, the one being crucified, the one the crowd is mocking, the one nailed to the cross. But above the cross, hovering, is another figure, the living Jesus. The real one, the divine one. And the living Jesus is laughing. I need you to hear that. The living Christ in this text is hovering above the cross, watching the crucifixion of his physical body, and he is laughing, joyfully, because he knows that what is being killed is not him. The body is described as the substitute. The real Christ is free, untouched, watching from above. And then the living Jesus speaks to Peter. He says, "He whom you saw being glad and laughing above the cross, that is the living Jesus. But he into whose hands and feet they are driving the nails, that is his physical part. That is his physical part." I've thought about this image a great deal. I want to be honest. The first time I read it, something in me recoiled. It felt wrong. It felt almost cruel. The idea that the divine Christ watched the crucifixion from above, laughing, while a body that looked like him was in agony. That felt like the opposite of the suffering God I had been taught. The God who enters the wound. The God who doesn't flinch from pain. But then I thought about it from the other direction. If you believe Jesus was fully divine and could not really suffer, which is what the Docetists believed, then what does the crucifixion mean? It means the divine being was present for it, witnessed it, but was not bound by it, was not diminished by it, was, in some sense, beyond it. The laughing Christ is not laughing at the suffering. He's laughing at the illusion that suffering can touch the divine. And once I read it that way, I couldn't dismiss it as easily as I wanted to, because that's a coherent theology. Not my theology, but a coherent one. one that takes seriously the infinite nature of the divine and refuses to let it be genuinely wounded by a Roman execution. The Docetists weren't saying the crucifixion didn't matter. They were saying the divine being couldn't be killed, couldn't be diminished, couldn't be touched by the worst that human cruelty can produce. And there's a kind of strange majesty in that, even if I can't fully hold it. Elaine Pagels in The Gnostic Gospels, published by Random House in 1979, one of the most important books I've read in the last decade. Pagels documents how these alternative Christologies were widespread before the 4th century push toward orthodoxy. She argues in Chapter 3 that the suppression of these views was not primarily a theological project, it was an institutional one. The communities that held these views were not just theologically different, they were organizationally different. They didn't always have bishops, they didn't always have hierarchies, they passed authority differently. And the communities that did have bishops, that did have hierarchies, gradually won, not just because their theology was more convincing, but because they were better organized, better at communicating, better at establishing networks of authority that could enforce a consistent teaching. Heresy, in this reading, is not simply wrong belief. It's the belief held by the people who lost the organizational competition, and I'm aware that's a disturbing way to think about it, but I can't pretend it isn't what the evidence shows. There is one more source I want to bring in before I tell you what this cost me. Around the year 200 AD, Serapion of Antioch, bishop, one of the leading voices of what was becoming Orthodox Christianity, discovered a Christian community in a place called Rhosis that was using a text called the Gospel of Peter in their worship services, their regular liturgy. He initially allowed it. He hadn't read it carefully. He knew it existed. He gave it a quick look. He thought it was basically fine. Then he read it carefully. The Gospel of Peter describes the crucifixion and says, and this is one of the most striking phrases I've encountered in this entire research, it says, Jesus was silent as having no pain. Silent as having no pain. On the cross, a man being nailed through his hands and feet and hung in the sun to die of asphyxiation and blood loss. And the text says he was silent because he had no pain. The text also describes Jesus being taken up at his death, not dying in the ordinary human sense, not giving up the spirit the way the canonical Gospels put it, but being taken up, withdrawn, lifted out of the physical event. Serapion banned the text. He wrote a letter about it, which we only know about because Eusebius preserved it in his Ecclesiastical History, Book 6. But here's the detail that caught me. Serapion writes, roughly translated, he writes that most things in this gospel are in accordance with the true teaching of the Savior, but that some parts were clearly added by people who held docetic views. Most things were fine, which means the community in Rhosis had been worshiping from this text for years of Sunday gatherings, years of communal prayer, years of reading aloud from a text that said, "The Christ on the cross felt no pain." And nobody had flagged it. Nobody had raised an alarm. Because the difference between the Orthodox and the docetic reading was subtle enough that you could share the same room, the same bread, the same cup, and not realize you were disagreeing about whether the person at the center of it had really felt anything. Let me sit in that for a moment, because it matters. They shared services, shared prayer, shared their most sacred moments together. And one group believed Jesus truly suffered, and the other believed he only seemed to. And it took a bishop reading the text carefully, years later, to notice that they were not worshiping the same Christ. Here's what this cost me. I came to this research with a clear story in my head. I knew who the heretics were. I had been taught, in Sunday school, in church history classes, in the general atmosphere of the Baptist tradition I grew up in, that the early church was basically sound, basically unified, and that heresy was the exception, the deviation, the thing that showed up later and had to be expelled. The heretics were the ones who arrived after the truth was already established, who introduced bad ideas into a pure original faith. That's the story I carried into this research. I don't carry it anymore, because what I found is almost the reverse. The Docetists weren't latecomer corruptors. They were early. They were present when 1 John was written. They were active enough that Ignatius was fighting them in 114 AD. They were using texts that circulated alongside canonical texts without being distinguished from them for years. They were in the communities, at the table, singing the same songs. The heretics weren't the ones who arrived and corrupted the pure thing. They might have been there at the beginning. And I don't know exactly what to do with that. I'm still working on it. But I know this. The word heresy, from the Greek heresis, which just means choice or faction. The word heresy doesn't mean wrong. It means the side that lost. Whoever won the argument got to call the other side the heretics, and the argument wasn't settled quickly. The Nicene Creed of 325 AD was a response to a different theological controversy. Arianism, the question of whether the Son was co-eternal with the Father. The Creed doesn't fully settle the humanity question, so they had to meet again. 381 AD, the Council of Constantinople. Not enough. 451 AD, the Council of Chalcedon. The definition of Chalcedon. Two complete natures, fully human and fully divine, in one person, without confusion, without mixture, without division, without separation. 451. That's 417 years after Ignatius was writing to Christian communities about people who said Jesus only seemed to suffer. 417 years. If you had been born the year Ignatius wrote those letters, you would have been dead for 330 years before the Church formally, definitively declared that Jesus was fully human. 330 years. Think about that for a second. The thing your church teaches as the foundational, obvious, never in dispute truth about the nature of Christ. It took 400 years of letters and councils and bans and exile and excommunication to establish. 4 centuries. 5 major councils, if you count Constantinople and Ephesus along with Nicaea and Chalcedon. That's not evidence of a pure truth being defended against occasional attack. That's evidence of a long, hard, costly fight. And I lost something when I understood that. I lost the version of early Christianity where the true teaching was there from the beginning, clear and unambiguous, and the heretics were people who wandered off a well-marked path. The path was being built while people were walking on it. And not everyone walking on it agreed about where it was going, or who was allowed to build it, or whether the person the whole path was named after had ever actually touched the ground. I started this by telling you I spent 35 years teaching history and never mentioned the word Docetism. Not once. I said that as an admission of ignorance, as a confession that I missed something. But sitting with it longer, I think the real confession is different. I never mentioned Docetism because I had been given a story about Christian origins that had no room for it. A story where the first Christians believed what my church believed, and any deviation from that was a late arrival, an import, a corruption. A story where the arrow pointed cleanly from the apostles to the creeds, with the heretics always attacking from outside. That story had no room for 1 John warning a community about Docetists who were already inside it. That story had no room for Ignatius in 114, fighting something that was clearly already established and deeply rooted. That story had no room for a community in Rhosis using the Gospel of Peter in their liturgy for years without anyone raising an alarm. And the thing I never mentioned in 35 years of teaching history? It wasn't an obscure footnote. It was a window into a version of Christianity that existed before the version I was taught, a version where the Christ who walked through Galilee didn't bleed, didn't hunger, didn't feel the cold at night, didn't die in any ordinary human sense. A version where the cry from the cross, my God, why have you forsaken me?" was the cry of a body whose divine inhabitant had already departed. I came to this research looking for the heresy, and what I found was that I might have been looking in the wrong direction. The Christianity I was raised in, the one with the fully human, fully suffering, bodily resurrected Jesus, is not the only Christianity that ever existed. It's the one that won. It's the one that had enough institutional momentum, enough political support, enough votes at enough councils to declare itself the true thing and call everything else the deviation. The Docetists lost. But losing doesn't mean they were wrong about what the earliest believers held. And when I think about those communities, gathering before Nicaea, before Chalcedon, before any council had formally decided anything about the two natures, gathering and praying to a Christ they believed was beyond suffering, whose death was a divine performance and not a divine wound, whose body on that cross was a substitute and not a sacrifice, I'm not sure I can look at them as simply wrong. I think they were trying to answer the same impossible question I'm trying to answer. What actually happened? Here's what I know now that I didn't know when I started. The word Docetism, dokein, to seem, contains the entire argument inside itself. The people who named this theology named it after the thing they believed was most important, that the appearance of Christ was not the reality of Christ, that you couldn't judge the divine by what you saw on the surface. Spinoza would have something to say about that. In the Tractatus Theologico-Politicus, published in 1670, his entire method is about reading past the surface, past what texts seem to say, into what they actually record and why. He's asking the same question these early communities were asking, just from a different angle and across a different century. What is really here, and what only seems to be? The Docetists looked at the Incarnation and said, "It seems. It appears. The divine doesn't truly touch the material world." Spinoza looked at the Scripture and said, "Its divine authority seems to be there. It appears to be unmediated revelation. But read these texts carefully as human products of human communities in specific historical moments, and you'll find something truer underneath, something worth more than the surface." I'm not equating the two projects, but I notice the same instinct running through both of them. The instinct to ask what seems and what is, the refusal to accept the surface as the final word. I found all of this disturbing when I first encountered it. I won't pretend otherwise. The image of the laughing Christ hovering above the cross is not easy to carry. It doesn't release you quickly. It keeps coming back. But I've stopped trying to force it into a simple category. I don't think it belongs in one. What I think is this. The earliest Christians were trying to figure out something impossible. The same impossible thing we're still trying to figure out. How can a divine being be human? How can the infinite take on the finite? How can the source of all existence suffer and die on a piece of wood outside a city wall in occupied Judea? Some of them said, it can't. It only seemed to. And the church that called them heretics had to meet formally, repeatedly, over 400 years to explain exactly why they were wrong. That's not nothing. Make of that what you will. I want to take a moment and speak directly to the people who have been sending super thanks on these videos. I see every single one. I read the names. You know what strikes me most? Most of you write something when you send it, not just the support. The note. This helped me understand something I've been sitting with for years. I showed this to my daughter and we talked for 3 hours. I'm 82 years old, and I finally feel like someone is asking the questions I was always afraid to ask. I want you to know those notes mean more to me than I can properly express. I started this channel in a spare bedroom with a stack of books and the feeling that I had found something too important to keep to myself. I didn't know if anyone would want to hear it. The super thanks support is what makes it possible for me to keep going, to keep reading, keep researching, keep putting these videos together the way they deserve to be put together instead of rushing. If you've gotten something from these videos, if something here has helped you think, or helped you breathe a little easier about questions you've been carrying, and you want to support that work, the super thanks button is there. Every contribution goes straight back into this research, and if you can't, please don't worry about it. Just being here, watching this through, is enough. I want to ask you something specific before you go. The detail that I can't shake, the one I keep coming back to, is that cry from the cross. My God, why have you forsaken me? I grew up with a certain explanation for that line. I'm guessing you did too. But after everything in this video, after Ignatius and the Johannine warning, and the laughing Christ and the community in Rosas that didn't notice the difference for years, I want to know, does that explanation still hold for you? Or has something shifted? I'm not asking you to commit to anything. I'm asking what you actually think, right now, in this moment. Leave it in the comments. I read all of them. And sometimes the most honest place is right there in a comment section on a video you found at 10 o'clock on a Tuesday night. I'll be there.